Here we go. Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone. Today we are starting a very special Torah portion. Bear with me. I am letting people into the room. Okay. Here we go. Just let me get these people in. Okay. So today we're starting a new Torah portion. One of the things that always touches me or moves me is how quickly we go through the Torah portion, from Torah portion to Torah portion, and we don't really have time to completely immerse ourselves in what the Torah portion is teaching, and we're off to the races. We're already going on to the next idea and to the next idea and to the next idea. And when I look at the calendar, I'm like, wow, we are already in Parshas Chayei, which is, we're getting into the winter. We're really starting to move along in the Torah of Bereshit. It happens so quickly that we go from personality to personality, from era to era, and of course all that took a very long time to happen. So we have so many lessons that we learn from each of the respective Torah portions in Bereshit, and Chayei is one of those Torah portions that are also very, very full. In general, when we study the book of Bereshit, because the book of Bereshit deals with the beginnings of time, the beginnings of civilization, the beginnings of the Jewish family, the beginnings of the Exodus. It's a whole bunch of beginnings. So what happens in those Torah portions really informs us so much about Jewish culture and Jewish nuance and Jewish identity and Jewish study. And so each of these things, each of these Torah portions are really very compact in terms of what we can draw out from it. However, as I am one to do, when I study the Torah portion, I having studied it many times, I will always chance upon some type of angle that I never really discovered before in this Torah portion. And then when I do find it, it's like a source of great joy. And then I want to share it with everybody. So that's what I'm going to do today. So let's talk about this Torah portion in a nutshell. The Torah portion is called Parshat Chayei Sarah. Parshat Chayei Sarah means a section of the life of Sarah. That's the name of the Torah portion. The Torah portion is called Parshat Chayei Sarah because the first words of this Torah portion begin with the words Vayu Chayei Sarah, Vayu Shnei Chayei Sarah. These were the years of the life of Sarah. So it talks about Sarah, but truly we are introduced to the notion of the life of Sarah by her passing. And there's a very famous question that is asked year to year, which is in the parsha that defines her exit from this world, why is the Torah portion named after her? Not only is the Torah portion named after her, but the Torah portion is called the life of Sarah. It's called the actual life of Sarah. So when the Torah portion is named the life of Sarah, it bespeaks that there is in this Torah portion elements that really relate to the life of Sarah. And so the famous question that the Rebbe asked, that we've addressed from multiple angles, that we are going to address from a completely different angle today, is the notion of why is a Torah portion that is devoted to the death and burial of someone called their life. And that's because in this week's Torah portion, what we see through the multiple events that happen in this week's Torah portion, and we have discussed different elements of this week's Torah portion in different years, but all the elements of this week's Torah portion somehow tie back to the legacy of Sarah, to the life of Sarah, and to the fact that Sarah is very much leaving an imprint in such a vivacious way that the Torah portion becomes called the life of Sarah. So in a nutshell, let's just go into the Torah portion in a nutshell, and then we're going to unravel a wonderful teaching that I found in a Hasidic discourse on this week's Torah portion that was delivered by the Rebbe based on a previous discourse of another Rebbe, Hasidic discourse, which is based on Zohar. And it's a little bit of a mystical teaching. And every so often we will go into the different realms of Jewish gods. And we mentioned many times that when we study Torah, we can study Torah on multiple levels. And sometimes there's a lot of meaning in the pshat, in the very basic meaning of the word. Sometimes we go into the drush or to the halacha, like we did last week, where we kind of tap into different teachings in Jewish law that actually are extrapolated from what we're learning. And sometimes we go into the more esoteric. And I came across this teaching that I found to be so elucidating that I wanted to share it, even though it does kind of veer into the esoteric. It's very much rooted in the verse and actually in the very practical applications of this week's Torah portion and also previous Torah portions. We're going to connect to previous Torah portions. So we're going to have a more global view on Sarah, on her legacy, and where she fits in terms of her impact on society and on Jewish life going forward, and what she teaches us and what her actions teach us. So let's just go into this Torah portion in a very, very brief nutshell. In this week's Torah portion, the Torah portion opens up with the story that Sarah dies at 127 years old, and she's buried in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. And Abraham purchases this cave from a man named Ephron the Hittite for 400 shekels of silver. And there's a whole discussion, and we've touched upon this element of the purchase of the land of Hebron in previous years. Suffice it to say, this Shabbat in the land of Israel, Hebron becomes a hub. People come from all over of Israel to spend Shabbat in Hebron to restate or to celebrate the fact that Abraham bought this land for Sarah and the inherent connection that the Jewish people have to this land, to Hebron. Then after this, Abraham seeks to find a wife for his son Isaac, and he famously sends his servant Eliezer to Haran to find a wife from his people. And he gives a sign, Eliezer does, that if someone comes out to give him water and offers also water for the camels, then that will be a sign that she's kind enough to be the matriarch of the Jewish people. And he does meet Rebecca, he meets Rivka at the well, and she invites him to his home. And of course, he brings Rebecca back, and Yitzchak sees her, and he meets her, and he marries her, and then he loves her. And the Torah tells us that he is comforted for the loss of his mother. And then finally, Avram takes a new wife called Keturah, which the sages tell us is really Hagar, his previous wife, and he has more children, and he dies at the end of this week's Torah portion, and he's buried next to Sarah. This is the Torah portion in a nutshell, this week's Torah portion. Now let's get into the actual text of the Torah portion and what we are going to learn about Sarah. Clearly, this Torah portion is focused on Sarah. Sarah is an important personality. Sarah is, excuse me, the matriarch of the Jewish people, but she shows up in this week's Torah portion in a very big way. So first and foremost, as we mentioned, the Torah portion is named for Sarah. And we know that by finding Rivka, by finding a woman that goes, so to speak, in the ways of Sarah, Sarah's legacy continues. And at the end of this week's Torah portion, we're told something about Rivka and how Rivka inherits all the blessings of Sarah, and the blessings of Sarah continue in Rivka's tent. And this is really the comfort that the parsha ends with, the comfort of this kind of longevity of Sarah, this kind of eternal life of Sarah that gets passed on through her daughter-in-law, Rebecca, who adopts her habits, who adopts her way of life, who adopts her faith, and is able to transmit it to the next generation, and is able to create a home that has all the values that she built. So that's in a nutshell this week's Torah portion. But let's get into the Torah portion itself, and let's see what Sarah can teach us about life and where she fills a very important mission in terms of our education, and not only our education, but the way we see the world. Okay, specifically, how we find joy. Okay, Sarah in search of joy. Okay, so here we have the opening of this week's Torah portion, and this week's Torah portion is the Torah portion, as I mentioned, is Chayei Sarah. We open up this week's Torah portion, and the Torah portion starts off by saying that Sarah lived 127 years. And the way the Torah portion is written, the way the Torah writes the words is Vayu Chayei Sarah. And the life of Sarah was Mea Shana, 100 years, Ve'esrim Shana, and 20 years, Ve'sheva Shanim, and 7 years. And then it repeats again, Shnei Chayei Sarah. These were the years of the life of Sarah. So right away, the unusual choice of language that the Torah uses to tell us her age when she passed away raises a lot of questions. This becomes a context for discussion. First, we see right away with Rashi, which we have right below us here is the Rashi. But beyond Rashi, we're going to go into the Rashi, and then we're going to take it to the next level. And what we can learn from the fact that the Torah does something unusual with the life of Sarah when it talks to us about her years. So here we have it. Vayu Chayei Sarah, and the life of Sarah was Mea Shana, Ve'esrim Shana, Ve'sheva Shana. 100 years, 20 years, 7 years. And as you know, you don't have to know Hebrew to know this, that this seems to be a kind of a redundancy of the word years. We want to say someone is 127 years old. We don't say they were 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. It seems to be a redundancy. Just say they were 127 years. And here it says Mea Shana, Esrim Shana, Sheva Shana. So we have a repetition of the word Shana in each of the section of years of the number, the 1, the 2, and the 7. And then after that, we have the repetition of the statement, Shnei Chayei Sarah, these were the years of the life of Sarah, which seems to be again redundant. So of course, we know that whenever we have a question about the plain meaning of the verse, we look into Rashi. And as we mentioned many times in this class, Rashi says about himself, Eini basi elo lefaresh pshuto shel mikra, I have come only to explain the very simple meaning of the verse. And we're going to ask and look into Rashi to see why this anomaly. Why is anomaly that Sarah, the years of her life, are mentioned in such a peculiar fashion? So let's go into Rashi. And then after we go into Rashi, we're going to go into more esoteric teachings from the Zohar and from the Hasidic masters that is going to open up a discussion that goes back in time and reveals something very unique about Sarah. So let's get into it. Vayu Chayei Sarah, Mea Shana, the Esrim Shana, the Sheva Shana. Rashi is repeating these words in his teachings to say, what is the meaning of the repetition? And inherent in writing what we call here, these words in bold, these bolded words, is what Torah scholars call Divrei HaMaskil, the opening words of Rashi, because it is the opening words of Rashi that pose the question. And the question that Rashi is posing is, why the repetition? And Rashi says, V'kach nichtav shana v'chol klal v'klal. The reason that the word years is written after every digit is to tell you, Leimer lecha shekol echad nishdosh la'atzmai. This is to teach you that every digit, so 1, 2, and 7, 127, that every digit is to be expounded upon individually. And Rashi continues. Bas meya kivas esrim lechet. When Sarah was 100, when she was 100 years old, she was like a 20-year-old regarding sin. Ma bas esrim leichata. Just like a 20-year-old has not sinned because she is not liable to punishment. We're going to get into that in a second. Shahare eina bas einshin. She's not liable for punishment. Af bas meya b'loichet. Even when she was 100 years old, she was without sin. Ubas esrim kivas sheva liyofi. And when she was 20, she was like a 7-year-old regards to beauty. And Rashi is quoting here from Bereshit Rabbah, which is the Medrash. So Rashi asked the question, why is this unusual presentation of a simple year in the life of Sarah, how old she was, in this 100 years, 20 years, 7 years? And the answer is because when she was, there was something to be learned about each section of those numbers. Each digit teaches us something. And Rashi brings a teaching from the Medrash that says that when she was 100, she was without sin like a 20-year-old. And when she was 20, she was as beautiful as a 7-year-old. And what does that mean? We're gonna go into that. We're gonna kind of unwrap the Rashi a little bit. And Rashi then adds up, Kulan Shavim Lataiva, all of them were equally good. She was equally good. All the years of her life were equally good, and that's why there is this additional Shnei Chayesara. That's Rashi. Okay, so we're going to just expound on Rashi slightly. We're going to open it up a little bit to kind of understand what does Rashi mean by this. What is the full meaning of what Rashi is saying, and then we're going to go into a more esoteric explanation on this that's going to open up a discussion about Sarah herself. So Rashi says that Sarah was like 100 when she was 100, she was like she was 20, and someone who's 20 is not punished. What does this mean? This means this is a part of Jewish law. There's a Jewish law. This is very interesting. That we know that in according to Jewish law, a child becomes responsible for their own actions at the age of bar or bat mitzvah. So 13 and 12 respectively, boys and girls. A boy at the age of 13, a girl at the age of 12, a girl earlier because she matures earlier. They become responsible for their own behavior and they have to take accountability for their own action. And indeed, when a boy is bar mitzvah, one of the blessings, and not the most exciting blessings, but one of the blessings that is said at the Torah, very interestingly enough, one of the blessings that's said at the Torah when the boy gets his aliyah is that the father makes a blessing.
Baruch Sheptaranu.
Yes, Baruch Sheptaranu min ha'onesh halazul. Thank you, God, for relieving me from the punishment that I heretofore had to accept from this child, meaning that there is a responsibility that the parents carry until a child is 13 and 12. And it's interesting, as someone who has taught elementary school and as someone who has taught high school, this is the truth. When a child is misbehaving, in elementary school, you reach out to the parents because there's a problem that the parents have to help you solve. But when a child is in high school, reaching out to the parents is less important as having a heart-to-heart discussion with the child itself, because at that point, parents has less influence on the child than the peers do. And so that's a natural evolution. So it's true that according to Jewish law, a parent or a child assumes responsibility for their actions by the age of 13 and 12. However, this is a fascinating part that is lesser known, that the Torah, or God, as it were, the Torah tells us that God does not truly hold a youth accountable for their behavior until they're 20. In other words, it's true that the complete responsibility for a child's behavior lies squarely on their parents till the age of bar mitzvah. So anything that a child will do, a child will break a glass in a store. The parents are responsible. You don't say to the child, you shouldn't have done that. You have to pay up. So up to the age of 12 or 13, the child is completely dependent on the parents, and the parents are completely responsible for the child's behavior, hence the bracha that is made at the Torah. But the Talmud tells us that there's a kind of a grace period between the ages of 13 and 20, where God does not really truly hold this youth responsible for their actions, with the understanding that young people will do foolish things because they are not completely developed. And so they're not going to have the same sense of achrayut. They're not going to have the same sense of responsibility imposed upon them from the Torah law, certainly from divine punishment, until they are 20. Once you're 20, now you're truly responsible for yourself. And this is something that's not so well known. And it actually ties in well, in Western societies, there is this notion of youth law. So when a youth criminal court or youth criminal law, that there is a certain flexibility or a certain softness that is applied to young people. Let's say, for example, their identity is not revealed in the media, or that they won't get life sentences unless it's very, very egregious. But most of the time, they will be given a second chance. And in the court system, it's usually the age of 18. And the Torah, so from the Torah's perspective, the divine grace period is until the age of 20. And so therefore, Rashi says that Sarah, when she was 100, was like a 20-year-old, because until you're 20, or what I guess until the 21st year, you're giving grace, and so you're free of blemish, and you're still pure in God's eyes. You're still a young person, and God is not holding you accountable. But after that, what you do in your 20s is your responsibility, absolutely, and of course, going forward, even more so. But from the age of 20, you're absolutely responsible for your actions. So when the Torah tells us through Rashi's commentary, that Sarah was at the age of 100, really pure in her behavior as a 20-year-old, it tells us something about the way Torah gives space for young people to find themselves. And it's not so harsh, even though we do have a ceremony, and there is a responsibility that is imposed on the young person, and the young person is made to understand that from this day forward, you are responsible for your actions, and they are indeed responsible for their actions. But nevertheless, in terms of what is quote unquote like recorded, like on their record, so to speak, that seems to be more nuanced, and so the record stays kind of clean, and they're giving some kind of reprieve. And it's a very fascinating insight to the fact that the Torah does give this kind of leeway to a young person to say, you were young, and I'm not going to hold this against you. So of course, when it comes to capital offenses, it's very different. It goes into another realm. But when it comes to other offenses, minor offenses, all types of minor offenses, whether those are religious offenses, like not praying, or whether those are bin adam l'chavera, not behaving in a way that is, apropos. Teenagers have a lot of growth that they have to do. The Torah does give us leeway. So it's an interesting insight within the words of Rashi that we learn about the way the Torah sees juvenile delinquency, juvenile behavior, and juvenile rehabilitation. Interesting idea. It's not a carte blanche the way the secular system has it, as Western courts have it, but there is a kind of a nuanced approach. Whereas, in God's eyes, God is, you have a chance to do tshuva. You're not doomed because you made some mistakes as a teenager, which is very fascinating. So the Torah tells us this about Sarah, that at the age of 100, she was really as light in terms of the choices that she made, that she didn't have to be heavy. She didn't carry her burden heavily, and that every year and every day was a good day for her. She made good choices all along the way. And the fact that the Torah tells us that when she was 20, she looked like she was 7, it's not talking about beauty per se, but the inner beauty, where we see a young child who's 7, and they have such an innocence about them. And Sarah had that innocence even at the age of 20. So it talks to us about Sarah's personality. You're starting to get a picture of this person who lived every day fully, who didn't have to live with regrets, who came to the end of her life with peace and with a tremendous legacy that we still are very much enmeshed with every single day. And this kind of, we're going to get into this, why this was. This opening words opens up a discussion about why this was. Who was Sarah? What can she teach us about our own lives? What is her secret of longevity? And I actually saw a sikha of the Rebbe, where the Rebbe was saying that what if a person lives their life and they are younger than Sarah? They're not 127 years old, and they look at themselves and they start to become despondent. They're studying Chayei Sarah. Okay, I'm going to answer your question in a second. They're studying Chayei Sarah, and they're like, look at me. I have so much burden. I do see something so heavy about my life. I don't feel like Sarah. I don't feel like every single day was a day that was filled with blessing or with potential, meeting my potential. What now? So the Rebbe says, for those people who study about Sarah and become despondent, know that in the process of Judaism, there's something called teshuvah. There's always a chance to repair, and that we're not marked either, in a black marker that is unrevocable, that cannot be erased. Rather, tshuva allows us to get back and to connect to our source in a true way. And it's interesting to note that today there's an emerging field in neurobiology, neuroscience, wherein people understand that behavior modification. So when we do, it's a not good deed. I'm not going to use the word sin because it's a very leading word. When we do a not good deed, we create a pathway, which is towards a negative. We create a neural pathway. And once we create that neural pathway, the second time around, it's easier to go and connect on that neural pathway, and so on and so on and so forth. And that is where bad habits get formed, or bad behavior, or averot get formed, because once we've done it, it becomes less hard to do it again. Whether that's getting angry, whether that's violating Torah law, a myriad of things, that once there's a neural pathway that gets opened, there is it's almost like a clearing in a forest, and then the person is more prone to do it again. And the answer, certainly behavior psychologists talk about this a lot. I'm looking at a lot of the research lately, is that the answer to negative behavior patterns, so this is true even for people who, God forbid, struggle with addiction in certain areas, is not to kind of fight the patterns or to feel remorse, because it kind of tears you down and brings you down, but to create new pathways, new habits. And these new habits will eventually become so strong that the old habits will kind of get overgrown in the brain. The neural pathways will become weaker, and the new pathways, the pathways of good, will actually become stronger. And with time, that old pathway will become like an old path in a forest that gets covered with brush and very hard to access. And that is really part and process of what tshuva can do for us. So the Rebbe says that a person shouldn't feel despondent when we do something. We don't live our life like Sarah, and we have parts of our life that we regret. It's not a black marker that never comes off with anything, but rather it's a pathway that's been entrenched, and that we can pull away from that pathway and create a new pathway. In other words, as long as we're given life, we're given a choice to start a new day. For the question of why specifically 7 years, what is there about the 7-year-old? I'm not so sure that there's something specifically about someone who's 7, but rather 7 is that age where a child is old enough to be able to communicate, and you see a little person. You have a baby, you don't see the full potential of that personality. But at the age of 7, a 7-year-old is someone who's really someone you can have a conversation with. They ask questions. They're very interesting little people, but they're still very innocent in terms of where life has led them. So they have that innocence, and I think that's what the Torah is talking about. And in Sarah's case, she lived 127 years old. So the fact that the 7 is chosen, it is also because that's the length of life that she lived. Now, from the Hasidic perspective, the Hasidic masters look at this, and there's a great teachings that they look at, and they look at it from the lens of the Zohar. Now we know that the Zohar is parallel to the Talmud, but it's more of the esoteric teachings of the Torah, and it sometimes sheds a light on human nature, and also on the person themselves and their soul and spirituality and purpose and the purposefulness of life. And that's where I want to go to today, which is this teaching from the Zohar that is brought down in a Hasidic discourse of the Rebbe in 1981, and this was based on, again, a teaching from the 5th Chabad Rebbe, who delved into this notion as well. So it's an extension of a teaching that's found in Jewish thoughts. And the question that they ask is this: why the question that Rashi asks, why is this tremendous focus on Sarah? The fact that she was 127 years, we don't find by any other of the matriarchs, says the Rebbe, that their age is mentioned at the time of their death. We don't find that we have a repetition that after we're told their age, it says this was the life of Sarah. As we saw before, there's a repetition not only in the years, okay, right over here where we have the repetition of the years, but we also have the repetition that these were the years of the life of Sarah. So the life of Sarah was 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years, and then we got that. We understand she lived 127 years, and then it repeats. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And so the fact that there's this redundancy of the repetition of the life of Sarah, our sages tell us something happens in the life of Sarah that is unique. It does not happen with anyone else, and does not happen even with any of the other matriarchs. And what is this? Sarah is able to achieve an equilibrium of joy and meaningfulness without arrogance. And she passes this on from generation to generation. How did she achieve this? So we go back, and this is what we go back into the Zohar. The Zohar speaks about the fact that what happened at the outset of civilization, what happened at the very beginning of creation. We know in the beginning of creation, we have Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden is a beautiful garden. And it's bliss, right? We spoke about this. It's bliss. And everything is just perfect. Everything is just the way it's meant to be. And yet we have human beings, and they upset the apple cart, and from there on, there's trouble and discontent and pain and suffering in the universe. But had Adam and Chava just stayed in the course and not eaten from the tree of knowledge, then everything would have been hunky-dory. So the question that is asked is, what happened what happened with Chava? Chava was the one who was taken by the snake's message. What caused her to listen to the snake? Why did she even listen to him to begin with? God told them to do something. Why listen to the snake? And we know that God sent the snake, and there was a purpose to the fall. And the fall was for part of the parcel of the whole purpose of creation, which is to rectify and to learn how to rectify basic flaws in humanity. But from a spiritual, mystical, but even psychological perspective, what caused Chava? Ask the Zohar, ask the mystics, what causes Chava to veer off and to listen to the serpent and to eat from that tree of knowledge? And this is the fascinating teaching that I found so interesting, and something that I have not come across so far, that I want to share this with you. So in this mimer, in this Hasidic discourse, it talks about the fact that what happened with Chava? Why did she have that need to sin? Why did she want to eat from that tree of knowledge? We're allowed to eat from all the fruits of all the trees in the garden. Why did she want to eat specifically from the tree of knowledge? And here comes a very fascinating insight. Adam and Chava were created by God. They live in God's garden. They live in the Garden of Eden. Everything is godly. We know that they were able to feel God, perceive God, and there is divine immanence and divine transcendence. Everything is God and suffused with God and about God. The power of creation is staring them straight in the face. And so Chava, in this space of created being, in face of her and all that is created, in the face of creation itself, in the face of God's immanence, in God's transcendence, Chava feels, am I really who I am? Am I me? Who am I? Am I my own person? Or am I by part of God? I feel like everything is one thing. It's this divine energy. But I want to be Chava. I want to be myself. I want to find my own meaning. I want to find my own joy. I don't want to be part of something. I want to be me. I want to find joy in me. And very, very fascinating insights from the Kabbalists on this. And it got me thinking, as a mom and a grandmother, that you see this with babies, newborn babies. When they're born, especially if they're breastfed. So breastfed would be I guess the equivalent of Adam and Chava in the Garden of Eden and having everything just given to them, that there was no need to work. Remember that the curse that Adam has after he sins in the Garden of Eden and in the exit of the Garden of Eden is that Adam is forced to toil the land. And God says, "Yegias kapecha kitaycha," by the sweat of your brow, you're going to eat from now. And that he tells Chava that your childbirth is not going to be natural, but it's going to be painful. And to the snake, that you're going to slither on the ground. But before that, they don't have to farm. They don't have to toil. It is not by the sweat of the brow that Adam is going to get his food. He's living in paradise. And he's just walking around and taking whatever he needs, and it grows naturally. And everything is the optimal conditions for growth. And that is truly like a nursing baby who has breast milk that is perfectly suited to the child, perfectly warmed up, the perfect body temperature so that the child can absorb it in the most comfortable fashion, perfectly sweet enough, not too sweet, perfect amount of fat versus protein, immune antibodies, everything that the child needs to survive is in that breast milk. And young babies, and this is borne out by behaviorists, very young babies believe on some level that they and their mother are one being. They see themselves as part of their mother. And then at one point in the development of the baby starts to notice that maybe I'm my own person, and maybe I'm not part of my mother, maybe I am my own person. And then at one point, the baby starts to pull away from the mother. And then, of course, when the baby becomes a toddler, we know very famously, they're the terrible twos. The child says no to everything you say, who wants to get dressed himself, who doesn't want to let you feed them, doesn't want to let you bathe them. It's me, I want to do it. I found it so fascinating that Chassidus says, in essence, this is what happened to Chava. Now, it's interesting. I have a question. Why Chava and why not Adam? Why does the Torah tell us about Chava, not Adam? And that's a question that I don't have an answer to yet. Maybe some of you can think of an answer to that.
Maybe because she came from him.
Maybe because she came from him. That was something that I was thinking about, that there was even a feeling of I am a part of something, and a part of something, and a part of something, and I want to be me. So the mystics say that Chava wasn't doing a sin, like she didn't want to listen to God, but rather she wanted to feel herself. She wanted to feel that she was an independent person capable of making her own choices, and that she wanted to taste from the tree of knowledge, because until now, it's not that they had no knowledge, but the knowledge that they had was like a very different type of knowledge. It was a potential knowledge. It was a knowledge in potentia, where she took from the tree of knowledge. What did she do? The tree of knowledge is called Eitz Hadas. And the mystics tell us that Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, the first time we see the word knowledge used as a verb. So we know that there is the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge. But the first time, the first time the first time the word knowledge is used as a verb, to know, is used after they are kicked out of the Garden of Eden, right before they're kicked out of the Garden of Eden, when they have this this kind of self-awareness, and it says, the Adam yada es Chava, and Adam knew Chava, right? And the sages say that knowing, so this verb knowing, to know, the first time we ever chance upon the word to know, we are presented it in the fashion of Adam knowing his wife, which our sages tell us is a euphemism for sexual intercourse, which is a euphemism for really connecting to someone in a most primal fashion and in a most deep fashion also. And so that knowing is completely a complete connection of knowledge, so much so that the knowledge becomes part and parcel of not only of your intellectual part, but also starts to impact your emotions. So we know that the Alter Rebbe, who named his school of thought Chabad, hence the name Chabad Hasidism, he spoke a lot about the notion of Chachma, Bina, Das. The three elements of knowledge are Chachma, Bina, and Das. Chachma being the kernel of knowledge, where there's the flash of inspiration. Bina is the expansion of that, and Das is the application or the internalization on all levels of the knowing. Sometimes you know, and sometimes you know in such a way that it becomes really connected even to your emotions. So this is what Chava was seeking. Chava was seeking an emotive connection that would let her know she would have a joy that came from her being her. And it was very difficult for her to be in this space where everything was God, and God was transcendent and immanent. And yes, someone pointed out so rightly so, and that's something that crossed my mind as well, is that she came from Adam. So who am I? I want to be me. I want to find the joy of saying, I'm Chava. And so that's why she was drawn to eat from the tree of knowledge. She wanted to separate from God and say, I'm not God. I'm not only part of God. I also have free choice. I also am somebody. And that freedom to choose gives us great joy. This is the truth. Like we know, that when people enjoy very much a buffet, or if they're at a restaurant, if they're given a menu, they enjoy looking at the menu. They're not going to have everything at the menu, but they enjoy the ability to be able to choose. Am I going to have this as the main course or this? Am I going to have this for the dessert or this? If it was only one thing that you could have, you came in, you have your things, your food. So you go into a fast food joint, they make one sandwich and that's it. So if you want that sandwich, you go to that place. Fine. But when you sit down to a restaurant, part of the joy, and people take time to do this, is they'll peruse the menu. Or if they're at a buffet, they'll walk around the buffet and say, well, maybe I'll have a little bit of this, or maybe I'll have a little bit of that. And people have more joy in, let's say, in a buffet. So I know, like, for example, at weddings, people look forward to the buffet reception of at the beginning and at the end. There's something very fun about it. This ability to choose what you're going to have. I'll have a little bit of this or that. And that joy that we get from choosing and knowing it's our choice is something that is part and parcel of the human experience. So Chava thought that in order for her to experience that joy, she had to separate from God. Just like a child sometimes thinks in order for them to feel joy, they have to separate from their parents, and therefore you would have the terrible tooth. So these mystics tell us that Chava wasn't looking to sin. She wasn't looking to rebel. She wasn't looking to be bad. She just wanted to be Chava. Chava was looking for Chava, and she wanted to find the joy of what does it mean to be Chava. And then that choice of disobeying God came with disastrous results. Now it's interesting that the sages speak about this often, about this notion of a person doesn't like to do what they're told to do because there's something so stifling to be told to do something. I remember when I left school and I started working, I had such a joy that I was responsible for the preparation. I didn't have to follow whatever was told to me. I didn't have to sit in a chair and not move. There's something that is joyless in having to do something where you are commanded to do something. And that's why our sages tell us, because of that gadol ha-mitzvah misha eina mitzvah, that someone who is commanded to do something and they do it is greater than the person who is not commanded to do it and doesn't. So often you'll see people who are not commanded in a certain commandment, they relish that commandment. Why? Because they're not commanded to do it. But if you're commanded to do it, then you're chafe at it. It's an obligation. I don't want to do it. There's no joy. And we see this play throughout religious life. when a person, let's say, is obligated to a minyan, they don't want to go because they have to go. The people who are not obligated to the minyan want to go because they don't have to go. It's a very interesting psychological reality that a person chafes at following the rules. We do it because we know that we have responsibilities, or we do it because we know that this is what creates a society, but we don't have necessarily a lot of joy in doing it. We prefer to do it our own way and do it on our own terms. And so therefore, this is a universal concept of this chafing against doing. But so Chava feels that she's going to find fulfillment and she'll find joy by pushing back against God and by eating from the tree of knowledge and by tasting what it means to have a knowledge that is completely integrated into herself, and that's something that she truly understands, and not that is given to her by God, something that she earns or takes by herself. And she's mistaken in thinking that this will bring her joy. And we know in the aftermath that not only is there no joy, but a certain measure of brokenness gets introduced to the world. And from that time on, mankind is broken. And so we have their children, Cain and Abel, kill themselves. We have the first infanticide. We have disconnect. We have jealousy. We have anger. We have pain in childbirth. We have difficulty in bringing fruit from the earth. So that when there is a disconnect from the divine, that's not a source of joy. And sometimes people do look at that and say, you know what? If only I could throw off the yoke of, and fill in the blanks, my parents, my religion, my culture, I will be joyful. If I disconnect from God, I will be joyful. And maybe at the moment it tastes delicious, but then it's not going to bring joy. It does not bring joy. And that's certainly not an internal joy, not an internal joy, and not an eternal joy. It could be a pleasure. There is pleasure in it, but that pleasure is fleeting, and when that pleasure is over, it's done. And so Chava, sorry, excuse me for this. I gotta shut off my phone. So Chava, in her quest for this kind of self and joy, thinks that by disconnecting from God and pushing away, and she will find joy, but she doesn't find joy there. She finds that she has brought brokenness into the world.
But excuse me,
Yes.
Deborah, if God knew the real reason why she did as she did,
Yes.
so why was she not? Why was she still punished as she was?
Not so much punishment as natural consequence. There is, when you create a breach, you've created a breach. In personal relationships, if we are in a relationship with someone, it could be a partner, it could be a spouse, it could be a parent, it could be a child, it could be a coworker, it could be a neighbor, any person that we are in a relationship with, and we breach the relationship. Each breach is on its own level why that would be a breach. So a universal form of breach. It's not that we're punished for that breach. It's just there's natural consequences of our behavior. And breaching with God creates a disconnect with our own souls. And so it does not bring joy. Chava was looking for pleasure, and she equated pleasure with joy. She thought the pleasure of eating from this knowledge, from eating from the fruit of that tree, would bring her joy. But she found that it did not bring her joy. It brought her brokenness. And it was a mistake. She sought pleasure and she equated pleasure with joy. And she felt that if she could self-determine her pleasure, this would bring her joy. But in this case, the self-determination of her pleasure came at the cost of a relationship with God. And that gave her an inner brokenness. That kind of fractures something very, very inherent about humanity itself. Fiona, you have a question?
But give me an example, if you don't mind. I just don't know. But what is an example of breaching? Like breaching, is that breaching the 7 no-hide laws, breaching the 10 commandments?
So in the case of God, it was just breaching the commandment, don't eat from the tree. It was, here's a tree, don't eat from it. that was the breach. In the case of any type of breach that we have with God ourselves today, it could be a violation of any of the commandments is a breach with God. Of course, like I mentioned before, the Rebbe said that if a person feels very distraught by the fact that they made that breach, there is a path to repair, and tshuva is possible. And we see this even in neuroscience, that there are new pathways can get formed, and we can repair that which we broke. When we're talking about a breach between a spouse, it could be not being sensitive to a spouse's needs, embarrassing the spouse, not doing something that the spouse asked you to do. It could be a greater breach, violation of the marriage itself, God forbid. There's always breaches that we can have. A child could be disrespectful to a parent, and that's a breach between the parent and the child, because the child has to give the parent honor. If it's between a coworker, there's a certain trust level or a certain kind of relying on something, and you breach it. There could be a breach. There could be minor breaches, tiny cracks, and there could be huge breaches. Chava took the one mitzvah they were given and violated it. So it was a major breach, but it was a breach that was obviously meant to happen in the grand scheme of things. But from Chava's perspective, the Kabbalists are easy on her. They say Chava just wanted to feel herself. She wanted to feel joy inside of herself. She didn't know who she was. She just wanted to be Chava. She was desperately seeking Chava. She was looking for herself. And she equated joy with pleasure, with doing what she wanted. And she found out that wasn't the way. Now, the mystics fast forward to Noah. Noah, at the end of the flood, when he comes back out of the ark, and the water recedes, and he's able to start planting. The vocation of Adam was to plant. What does he plant? He plants a vineyard, and he plants a vineyard. And in that, one of the first things he does is he enjoys his fruits of the vineyard. He makes himself a wine, and we know what happens with that wine. He becomes drunk, and in his drunken fashion, he embarrasses himself. His children find him naked. So the mystics say again with Noah wasn't bad. He wasn't some kind of drunk. He wasn't an irresponsible person. Noah felt a great disconnect, that disconnect that happened from the breach in the Garden of Eden. He felt a disconnect with himself and with God. And he wanted to repair that disconnect. He wanted to lose himself so he could find God. You know, it's interesting. It's the polar opposite of what Chava did. Chava wanted to find herself, so she lost God. Noah, say the mystics, wanted to lose himself so he could find God. Because sometimes you take up too much of space of yourself and then you can't find God. And so he drank alcohol to lose himself in order to find God. And this is a teaching that the Zohar brings, that Noah got drunk in this search of meaning and joy, of being able to connect to his creator, which he felt God had destroyed the world, and he wanted to come back and repair, say the mystics, the breach of the Garden of Eden. And so he drank and he drank and drank, and he tried to lose himself in that, lose himself in the unconsciousness of it and connect with the divine. And of course, we know that met with disastrous results. What happened to Noah? He humiliated himself. He became embarrassed. But what he searched for was connection with God. He wanted to lose himself to connect with God. And by the way, you see this today with all sorts of drugs, which are very, very popular and prominent. From no matter the different in young people, no matter their age group, you find that wealthier kids can afford more expensive designer drugs, and poor kids have to rely on whatever drugs are available. What is it that draws young people to drugs? This idea of losing yourself, because you're trying to find your true self. You're trying to find your connection to the divine. So you want to lose yourself, and you hope you're going to find a connection to God in that losing of yourself. And so there is a truth that in order to have God in your life, you have to make space for God. You have to nullify yourself, but you don't lose yourself through outside substances like Noah did. And the Zohar says that what Noah did was he tried to fix this disconnect that was created by the exit of the Garden of Eden. But he lost himself through using recreational methods to lose himself, which did not bring him any joy, but only humiliation. And then our sages say, we come to Sarah. Sarah almost lost herself because she was taken down to Egypt and she was taken into Pharaoh, yet she emerged from that experience completely unscathed, meaning that it did not affect her spiritually. And not only that, she had an innate connection to what God wanted by being humble at the same time and being very giving. And the Zohar says we see this by the fact that we're Chava. When we talk about her connection to childbirth, God says to Chava, your childbirth is going to be very painful. It's going to be with a lot of pain and difficulty. And then the next time we talk about childbirth, we're talking about Sarah. And God tells Sarah, you're going to have a child at an age that she was already beyond. What did Sarah do when she heard that God was going to tell her that? She laughed. And of course, there are people who see this laughter as some kind of negativity. But Sarah's laughter was the joy that she felt in her connection to God. That's what our mystics tell us. And then what does she do? What does she name her child? She names her child Yitzchak. She names her child joy or laughter, so that she says, this is what joy is. Joy is losing yourself in the face of your creator, so that you lose yourself in the face of creator but how? By connecting your soul to the desire of your creator, and also to that which you can I just got a train of thoughts. By connecting yourself to that which you can give to others. So Sarah says, I will take care of this child, a child that was given to me by God, and this is where I get my joy, because I'm going to do for another being. Now, in the case of Sarah, it was giving to her child, but our sages tell us that when Sarah died, 3 things disappeared: the cloud, the bread, and the lights. And when Rebecca came back into the tent, those 3 things reappeared. Meaning, what is the notion of the cloud, the tent, and the lights? So our sages tell us the cloud is God's grace. It is also the laws of family purity. The bread is the challah and the laws of kosher, and the light is the Shabbat candles. So Sarah found a way to connect to herself, to find her own being, her self-expression, a sense of joy, a sense of purpose that actually transcends her own lifetime, that passes down to the next generation, and to the generation after that, and to the generation after that. And there's no greater joy in creating something that is transcendent. But that transcendence doesn't come at the cost of disconnecting from God, like Eve. It does not come at the cost of losing oneself in a way that is not respectable to oneself, but rather it comes through being in tune to your soul, to your divine being. And that is shown to us by the fact that Sarah lived 127 years, and every single day of her life, she strived to be the best she can be, meaning being connected to God's desires and nullifying herself in the face of it, but at the same time not losing herself because she gave of herself. We know she was hospitable. She served the guests well. We know the Torah tells us that when Abraham and Sarah left left Haran, when they left their birthplace, it says they came to Israel, they came to the land of Canaan, b'nefesh asher asu b'Haran, with the life that they created in Haran. And we mentioned last week, what life are we talking about? They had no children. So what was this life that they created in Haran? The life that they created in Haran is the people that they impacted in Haran. And Sarah's whole life was devoted to others. And that says the Mimer and the Zohar is where the true joy comes. True joy does not come from cutting yourself from your source, like Eve did. True joy does not come from losing yourself in trying to get lost so that you can find God. But true joy comes from purposeful living. And in Sarah's case, those three overarching, the cloud also represents God's glory. That means that she was connected to to the spirituality and the divinity of God. And at the same time, she found joy in the giving. And that is what she leaves to us, and she leaves for all generations to come, that true joy comes from purposeful giving and having meaning in our actions. And very famously, Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, he underscores that this idea that a person will not find joy from anything, and could find joy even in the most difficult of circumstance if there is meaning and purpose to the actions that they are embarking on. And so what Sarah leaves us as a legacy for each and every one of us in our own lives is to say to ourselves, without getting too hard on ourselves, let's be like Sarah. We're learning about Sarah this week. Let's tap into the energy of Sarah. Sarah is a giver. She finds people who need her, and she gives to them. And we know that the number one way for a person to get out of depression, for a person to get out of self-pity, for a person to get out of apathy, is to just do something for someone, even something very small, like giving a little tzedakah, giving someone the time of day, listening to someone, giving someone a listening ear. It doesn't have to be financial. It doesn't have to be something that is huge, but something very small that we can do for someone else is something that is very, very powerful. And what we spoke about last week, this idea that Sodom is this idea that I cannot share, or I cannot give to you because why should I? Sarah is the antidote to that. It's like to forgive, not only to give up and to let another person enjoy, but to see where can I do something good for someone. And if we do that, if we walk away this week with the lesson of Sarah, which is let me look really hard where I can do something for someone, where I can do something for God, and thereby really connect to our inner source. That truly gives us the greatest pleasure, because the pleasure that we have from taking care of ourselves, which sometimes we do need to do in order to have balance, especially if we're givers. So hence the woman with the shopping bags in my little promo for the Parsha. There is pleasure in buying something nice for yourself. And there is pleasure in enjoying something physical, like a nice dinner at a restaurant. But it's fleeting pleasure, and it does not allow us to have true joy. The true joy comes, this is what Sarah tells us, is from the giving of others and being connected to your divine source, not cutting yourself from the divine source, not losing yourself, not a fake humility, but a true humility in recognition of all the gifts that we've been given, the divine source that is the source of all our gifts, and thereby sharing that with anyone. We all meet people in our lives that we know can use a little kindness, that we know can use a little good. And when we share that, we become joyful immediately. There's no greater joy than giving. Yes.
Okay, I've got a few questions for you on this topic. So I'm a really big giver. I'm thinking of other people before myself. I'm not married, I don't have a family, but I treat everybody around me like my family. It's to the point where I get burnt out from it, like from constantly helping. So what I would like to do is, I have been advised to pull back from the helping, and do some self-care instead of helping constantly. So I'm just wondering, so that's the first question. And then I have another question. I have a question about teshuva, and then a question about tzedakah. So
okay, so let me take this question first.
Yes.
There is a notion, we're talking Kabbalah today, we're in a Kabbalistic mode, so let's do all Kabbalah. Kabbalah talks about the sefirot, the different energy levels and the different emotive energies that exist in this world, chesed and gevura. Tiferes Netzach Hod Yesod Malchut. And if you ever saw a Kabbalistic chart, you'll see that there's circles that are to the right, to the left, to the right, to the left, and there's
Yes.
something in the middle. That's because if we're too much on the right, which is chesed, we're gonna actually end up being on the left. Okay, if a person gives too much of themselves to the point that there's nowhere to draw from, they will actually become gevura. They will become withholders because they won't be able to. There's a balance that's required. So we know that in the sphere to Omer, we talk about chesed shebechesed, chesed shebegvura. Balance is key. So of course, if a person by nature is a giver, they have to replenish their own well. What are they going to give? If you give and give and give, and there's nothing left to give, and you're dry, then you have to be careful. And that person does a mitzvah by connecting to the divine will, which is also that you have to be something in order to give. There's a notion in Kabbalah that there is kelim and orot. Kelim are vessels, orot are energies. And if a person has a lot of energies, goodwill, good gestures, but they don't have a kelim, they have no vessel. Their vessel is broken because they have never fed it. There's nothing in the vessel. Those energies get dissipated. They're in order in this world, because we live in the world of tikkun. We live in the world of action, not in the world of ideas. So in this world, the structure of this world is receptacle and energy. First receptacle and then energy. Receptacle is you. If you are broken because you have nothing left, then you can't give out your energy. So first, the keli has to be whole. What I'm talking about with Chava is not that she didn't want to give. She gave Adam the apple. She wanted him to share the experience. It was more that she was seeking a pleasure that was outside of the divine. And she thought that would make her happy. Disconnecting from God is going to make her happy. And often we see this with children, young children. They want to rebel against their parents, and then they come back themselves because they think that will make them happy. So that was Chava's mistake. Chava's mistake was thinking that by disconnecting from the divine, she will find herself by disobeying God. But that's a short-term gain for long-term pain. What Sarah did was she never disconnected from God, even when she was in Egypt, and she was physically disconnected from God in the sense that man took her. She was unscathed. She always stayed connected to God. And because of that, she was able to give and able to see a child as a blessing and not to see the child as a burden. And that was something that came from her own inner strength. It was her connection to God. And that connection to God does require a certain amount of self-nullification, but it's not the self-nullification of Noah that gets completely boozed up to lose himself because he's trying to find himself. And so this is trying to find God. People who take drugs, they go through tremendous, wonderful experiences. They lose themselves and they find God, they find creation, they find things. But it's not sustainable, and it's not the way. It could be short term. Chava didn't want to rebel when eating. It's not that she didn't want to rebel per se. She didn't want to make a huge rebellion. It wasn't like she was here, I'm going to rebel against God. It was a minor rebellion. It wasn't like she was planning to take down the universe. She was just wanting to feel herself. And, we all do that. And we need to do it on some level. But she felt that the way she's going to feel herself was to disconnect from God. And when we've tried to feel ourselves and find joy in ourselves by disconnecting from God, it's a non-starter. It's a nuance. What the Kabbalah is telling us, what the Zohar is telling us, is that Chava was not evil. Her sin was not very big. It was a small sin, but it had huge consequences because it was predicated on the notion that she can disconnect from God. And as being sourced by God, because our soul is sourced to God, and our soul pines for God, whether we understand it or not. Connecting from our divine source is like cutting off your nose to spite your face, even though she meant to really connect to herself and to find herself. But she went too far. And it was, I have to disobey God to find myself. But they're kind to her. They're kind on her. They say she was suffused with God's immanence and God's transcendence, and she didn't know where she was. So she didn't know who she was. So they're not judging her harshly, but it's still a cautionary tale. It's one of the most cautionary tales that we have. It's the predicate, all of everything is predicated on this cautionary tale. So that's what it's a nuance of saying, yes, a person finds themselves, but they don't have to lose their connection to God to find themselves. And they don't have to lose themselves to find themselves. To find joy and to find meaning, you could be connected to God, and you could be hearing your soul and also rejoicing in the ability to do and to connect with God and to do for others, and having joy in every single day of your life, and finding the joy to give in your life. Now, if someone is already so much of a giver, and there are people that are empaths, that when someone is coming to them and cries to them, it destroys their inner being. They can't sleep at night. The person has to know their own weakness. They have to know their own strength, and with that, they will be able to navigate this. But what the mystics say about Sarah, what Sarah did for us, it's not that she's someone that we can look and say, oh, she was right. It's much more than that. What Sarah did for us was she actually opened up that channel that I was talking about, that pathway. Once she did it, once she created a model for how we should behave, she actually created also a pathway that becomes a pathway that we can follow. And we look at what Sarah did. She had the challah, she had the bread. And what is challah about? When you make bread, you take a section of the challah off and you make a blessing. And so this is, again, thanking God for the blessing. When she lit the candles, it was to recognize that the week is over and God rested on the seventh day. And again, that was a connection to the divine reality. So in the challah, she elevated the vitality and the nourishment of her family. In the candles, she connected to the holiness of time, and in the cloud, she connected to the holiness of the body. And these are things that she leaves for us, and she leaves a pathway for us. And indeed, our sages say these become these very central mitzvot in a woman's life, and she gives us a pathway forward. But ultimately, what Sarah does do is she finds joy in what she's doing. She finds happiness in what she's doing. And yes, of course, she was entitled to be very happy because she had a baby at an age that she thought she couldn't have a baby, but she turned that into a joyful experience. And so what a baby is very difficult, but she turned it into a joy. But it wasn't only her baby. Yitzchak becomes a symbol of what Sarah is. She gave him the name. It reflects her inner core. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to see the kindness. When she heard the angels gave her blessings, she didn't get angry. She didn't say, oh, don't tell me such nonsense. Oh, please don't get my hopes up high. She started to laugh. So Sarah's response was with joy and with laughter. And she saw laughter in blessing, and she saw laughter in her child. And that's what we could all do. We could all look at every single day that we have in our life and find the joy and the laughter through giving, and see things in a joyful way. And that's what Sarah gave for us. She gives a path forward. And this is especially important for women because we bear so much. We bear so much of responsibility between what we have to do for ourselves, our family, our parents, our friends. We are connectors of humanity. We are connectors of the Jewish community. King Solomon says, Eshet Chayil Miyimsa. The woman is the mainstay of all of Judaism. A lot is demanded of us. We are a lot stronger than we think we are. And the way we forge forward, and this is not easy, is through joy. And Sarah told us that the joy that we have is not the joy of breaking away, and not the joy of pleasure, not the joy of losing ourselves, but the joy of being mindful, of joy of being inside every single moment. And this is really what the Torah tells us, that Sarah lived 127 years of her life. And Rashi says, Kulam l'taiva, they were all good, meaning that every single day, Sarah was mindful of her time. Every single day of her life, she was mindful of her experience. She was connected to the time that she was in a full way. She didn't look for outside pleasures. She didn't look for getting lost. She was present. She was focused. She did what she had to do, and she did it with joy. And that is a lesson that we can all take, a mindfulness, to be present and to be joyful in every experience that we have coming our way. And that is where we truly find joy, not in shopping, even though we have joy in shopping, not in the pleasure seeking elements of life, not in the, losing ourselves into certain, letting go and losing ourselves and forgetting who we are, but really by being mindful, by being present, by making sure that every single one of our days is a full day, that every single one of our years is a full year. And how do we do that? We do that by being present in a joyful way where we are. And that's what Sarah did so well. She was present. And that's why the Torah tells us, says this mimer, that Sarah lived 100 years, 20 years, 7 years, because her years were mindful years. So they were full, they were complete, they were all good because they were all present, and they were not escape. They were not escapism, even though she was kind of thrown to the wolves, but she came back and said, no, I don't belong there. And no sweat. She was taken by Pharaoh. That's pretty traumatic. Yet she went back to her goal, being present, being here, and she did it with joy. And she found laughter even in a blessing that she thought was crazy. She didn't become sarcastic, but she would start to laugh. And she found joy in being able to give to a child. And so she names her child Laughter. And I think that is really something that we can all take into our lives, which is to be mindful, to use every single day that God gives us on this earth in a joyful way and in a way that's connected. And that true joy comes from that connection, not from escapism and not from rebellion, but from being present, being there, giving, and if we need to, taking a break. If we need to, of course, if we're giving, we have to take a break. And I'm all for a women self-nurturing and taking breaks and being introspective, because the well cannot run dry. But Sarah teaches us how to do this with joy, and the joy comes from mindfulness. And the mindfulness comes from the blessing of every single day. And that's why the Torah tells us that 127 years, every single year was a day, was full. So we went over our time. So sorry for that. I hope next week I can keep to my 12 o'clock thing, or at least do the question period after we finish. Next week I will do that. I'll do question after 12 o'clock. But thank you very much for joining me. And I hope that the spirit of Sarah and the lesson that we learned today, I found it extremely informative. I was blown away by this mimer, and I said, this is something I must share this week. And I'm always shocked by how much I will find things that, even though I'm teaching this portion so many years, I'll find things that I never chanced upon until now. And I think the fact that I find it is a shgacha pratis, a divine providence, so I can share it with you, and most of all, share it with myself, because that's where it all starts, right? It all starts with each and every single one of us. So thank you for joining me. And
That was amazing, but you left us with like far too many questions.
I know we have to do.
I just
well, you know what? I'll let everyone. I'll tell you what. I'll let everyone who needs to go. I'll take 5 more minutes of questions. So anyone who needs to go. Don't feel obligated to stay. And if anyone has questions, I'll take.
I have just one quick question. Why it seems to me, and perhaps I'm wrong, that the sin of or the action of Noah was seen more harshly than the action of Chava, and she was trying to connect to herself when he was trying to connect to Shem. So it's like Sarah found the balance, right? But so then, what is it more? Is it more to connect to Hashem or to connect to herself? Like, it seems like there's not exactly a balance there. What was
what Noah, what Sarah, what Eve wanted to do was to find herself through disconnecting from God.
Mhm.
What Noah wanted to do was find God through losing himself.
Exactly, but it seems like he was.
God is not found by disconnecting from him, and God is not found from losing yourself. God doesn't want us to lose ourselves. He doesn't want us to be in an altered state of consciousness so that we can find him.
I understand that, but they're equally. Just my question is, were they equally
bad.
judged? Were they equally negative?
It's equally negative. It's
Okay.
equally, or at least, I don't know, I'm not God, but it's equally useless.
Okay, that was
But
my question.
Laura,
Yes.
may I just ask you, I
Sure.
love to give. It makes me feel really good, actually.
yes.
However, I have a flaw in that I don't hear thank you back, and that kind of bothers me. So I just wondered, like, should there be an expectations, or I should just ignore it?
Okay, so this is a good question. Look, this is again what we talked about before, having the well run dry. You know, sometimes for the well not to run dry, you need to hear a thank you. You have to know yourself. You have to know yourself. If you feel that not being appreciated is drying you out and is making it difficult for you to give more, that's a reality of yourself. That you have to know yourself. A person can do, but we do live within the realm and the construct of reality. We're not angels. We're human beings. We have feeling, we have bodies. And to the extent that we want to transcend ourselves by giving to others, by connecting to God, is beautiful. But if we feel, let's say in your case, that if you don't get a thank you, it's drawing you up and then making you maybe even resentful. So then there's nothing wrong with pulling back in that case, because there is the idea of oros b'kelim. There has to be vessels for goodness. If the vessel gets broken, nothing happens. Nothing can happen. If your vessel is broken and leaking light, then nothing can happen further. So your vessel has to be intact. And the Kabbalists talk about that, because the Kabbalists talk about tremendous ideas of connecting to the divine, but they say always, orot b'kelim, the light, the energies have to first find a housing. They have to be in a vessel. They have to be an intact vessel. And that intact vessel means also a body has to be healthy. If a person is running ragged and completely unhealthy, then, and they're doing mitzvot and they're doing everything for everyone, but because of that, they don't have their own vessel is broken. We know that it's only a matter of time that their vessel is going to break. They're going to break down. They're going to have a breakdown. And so we have a notion in Torah that we have to watch our souls. We have to watch our bodies. We have to take care of our souls through our bodies, because if we have a broken body, how do we do well? Like the fifth Rebbe of Chabad said, a small hole, a small deficit in a body creates a huge deficit in the soul. Think about that saying, not the other way around. Not that a deficit in the soul creates a deficit in the body. No, the fifth Chabad Rebbe said a small deficit in a body, meaning a compromised body because the body is worn down, or their immune system is shot, or their nervous system is shot, whatever it is. A small hole in a body, says the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, is a large hole in the soul, creates a large hole in the soul. Because first we need to have a vessel. The vessel has to be intact. It's not that Chava didn't have a vessel. It's not that she was broken. She just didn't know where she was. She didn't know if she was. She wanted to feel, I'm Chava. And you see this with children. They will hit you to make sure that they're still here, that they're okay, that they need to push back to know that there's walls around them. So if a person is burned out by the lack of thank yous, there's nothing wrong with saying at a different time, not when you're giving, I would appreciate appreciation. Because if that's what fills your well so you can do more, that's what you need. That being said, I would say that the greatest source of dissatisfaction that we experience is from unmet expectations. And so it's always a good idea to have very low expectations, and then you'll never be dissatisfied. But of course, if those are truly low expectations and not imposed, where there's a bitterness that starts to build up, or a resentment that starts to build up, that's dangerous. And you have to know yourself, because to be a giver, you have to first be. If you're not there because you're broken from lack of appreciation, you can't give. Now you can work on yourself to become more resilient. You could try to say, they need me, and you can give them the benefit of the doubt why they don't say thank you. But the person has to know themselves. And if you feel that it's burning you out, you won't be able to give others. And maybe you won't be able to give the person who would truly appreciate it and who truly needs it. So you have to be available to give. And sometimes that means taking care of yourself. And that's why it is important, especially for women, to recharge, because a woman will push herself past herself. A woman will there's a very famous joke with the man cold and the woman cold. The man has a cold, he goes to bed, he cries to his wife, she has to bring him tea, he's not feeling good. And the woman kind of shuffles through the day, still does the dishes, throws in the laundry, and she's nursing a cup of tea the whole time and says, what can I do? I have to get this done. So we women, we will rise to the occasion by our very nature. And that's why we have to be extra careful. I mean, even in the marriage contract in the Ksuba recognizes that. There's no impositions on a woman. There's no responsibilities put on the woman rather than just being married. Because the Torah knows she's going to step up to the plate. You don't have to worry about her. You have to tell the husband what his responsibilities are to her. She'll step up. And women do have to be careful not to be burned out. And sometimes we do find ourselves sandwiched with multiple problems. People in our lives that need us. Sometimes it's between a parent and a child, and there's a we don't know who to turn to first. Or sometimes it's between a spouse and a child, a spouse and a neighbor, a nephew. We do show up, and so we could get burned out. And maybe this was the loss that Chava was feeling in terms of her own her femininity. That maybe that is something inherent in the femininities. Who am I? I'm somebody. I don't know who said it. Here, I am woman, hear me roar. Was it Gloria Steinem? Like there's idea of like I want to be heard. I am a woman. Yeah, I'm not nobody. So that's something that maybe is part and parcel of the woman consciousness. The need to say I'm here. I'm somebody. But the way Chava did it, and again, the mystics are very kind on her. They're not harsh on her. They said she just wanted to find herself. But the way she did it was by disconnecting from God, which is a no starter. And with the way Noah did it was by losing himself, which is again a no starter. What Sarah did was mindful together. And by the way, we know that Sarah was not all kindness. She wasn't only doing for others. She did for her children. Let's say she did for Yitzchak by pushing away Ishmael. So it wasn't that she was just miss kindness. She wasn't miss goodness and kindness. She was miss strength. She was miss resilience. So when she felt that this boy was teaching her kid to be violent, she said, "I'll have none of that. This is I didn't have this kid at such a late age for him to turn into another violent kid, another kid in the gang on the street. My kid's going to be special. He's going to be different." And so she pushed away Ishmael. That wasn't kind. That was strength. And yet she did it anyway. So it's not that Sarah was just giving and giving and giving. Well, if she was giving and giving, she wouldn't have gotten rid of Hagar. She wouldn't have gotten rid of Ishmael. She drew the line. She said, Ad Khan, until here. No, not you. This is too much. I had an idea. It was a bad idea. And I don't want it anymore. And it's not working for me anymore. And she had resilience. She's not Mrs. Goody Two-Shoes. She is resilient. Her name is Sarah. Sarah means princess. She has strength. She has character. But she's also not living in the netherworlds. She's not living outside in fantasy land like Noah, losing himself or disconnecting from God. She was with Abraham in his message for God. In fact, something that I did not mention before, and something that is very well known, is that Abraham, when he was told by Sarah to send away Ishmael, he did not want to listen to her. And God tells him, listen to Sarah's voice. And Rashi says over there, the fact that God told Sarah, God told Abraham, listen to Sarah's voice, tells us that Sarah was greater in Ruach HaKodesh. She had greater divine inspiration than even Abraham. And she knew things. She was more divinely in tune than even Abraham was. That's what the sages say about Sarah, that she was greater in Ruach HaKodesh. I don't have the chapter and verse. I can look it up for you, but it's one of the Rashis. When Abraham is reluctant to send away Ishmael, he says, Kol Masha Amar Lecha Sarah, Shma B'kola. Anything that Sarah tells you, you listen to her voice. And Rashi says, Mikan, from here we learned that Gedolah Sarah Mi Avram Beruach HaKodesh, that Sarah was greater than Abraham in divine intuition. She had greater divine intuition. She was more connected into the divine message than even Abraham was. So that was her greatness. Her greatness was that divine intuition. She was connected to the message, which she had feet firmly planted on earth. And every single day she lived into the fullest. And that is what we look at as a model for our own lives. And that's when we say that this was the life of Sarah, that the life of Sarah, and why this Torah portion is called the life of Sarah, is because Sarah's life continues to inspire us. And if we go in her footsteps, we are we inherit her ways, and it's going to be a blessing for us because she has an enduring quality to her, as we see. None of the other matriarchs have their age mentioned. None of the other matriarchs have their years mentioned twice. There's something very powerful in Sarah. Sarah is a powerful woman. Her goodness and her giving, it comes from an inner strength, not from a weakness. So she's a very balanced person, and that's something that we can all strive to be. And this is why the mystics compare her to Eve, they compare her to Noah, and they say, do it like Sarah. She got it right. So that's the message for this week.
Deborah, how can we get the recording? I want to hear this today.
Okay, you know what, I'm gonna download it now. I'll download it now, which I never do. I always run to my next thing.
I know,
I'll
but how
download
do
it
we
now,
get?
and I'll email, I'll send out an email for the recording.
Yes, I get it? Okay,
Yes,
I
I
want
will
to hear it
do
again.
I will
I
do
wanna
it.
hear it.
Pleasure. Thank
Please.
you, everyone. Have a most blessed week.
Bravo,
Thank
bravo.
you.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful.
Thank you.